Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. We're coming to the end of the semester. I don't know about you, but I'm going to miss you guys. We have done a lot in this American literature class, which is of course your course code ENG552. And after going through essays, short stories, novels, poetry, we are finally approaching the end of the semester, and at the end of the semester we are doing the Glass Menagerie, which is a contemporary American play by Tennessee Williams. Tennessee Williams is one of the most famous American playwrights, and he's famous also because he's a contemporary playwright, and the plays that he wrote he saw performed in his life. So he was one of the lucky ones. He worked with directors like Elia Kazan, who had his own opinion about how a play should be presented. And in one play in particular, that is Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, Tennessee Williams wrote two endings. He wrote the ending that he wanted, and then because Elia Kazan was not satisfied with the ending, he asked Williams to write another ending. So he was very, very involved in how the play was to be presented, how it was to be performed, and he saw several of his plays not only performed on Broadway and other stages, but also turned into movies. And of course that meant that he was a very successful playwright also. The play that we're doing right now is titled The Glass Menagerie, and like Williams's other plays, the title is very important. Up to the point where we left off in the last story, the Glass Menagerie appears to represent the collection of glass animals that Laura Wingfield has in her house. You know that at the very beginning of the play, Laura is shown to be polishing and cleaning these glass animals, and they are in a cabinet, and Laura is very interested in taking care of these glass animals. In fact, it would not be wrong to say that she's obsessed with these glass animals, because at one point in the play, her brother Tom Wingfield becomes very angry because his coat doesn't fit him. So in his anger, he just tears off his coat and he throws it. Now when he throws the coat, it goes and hits the glass cabinet, and there is the sound of breaking glass. Without knowing what has actually broken, Laura cries out as if it's not the glass animal that has been broken, but it is Laura herself who has been wounded. So she is very, very attached to these animals, and that is a very essential part of her nature. Tom refers to this when his mother Amanda Wingfield says that we need to get Laura married off, and you should call some of your friends and colleagues from the warehouse in which you are working so that they can meet Laura and maybe agree to marrying her. And Tom says, Laura is very different from other people. Now he doesn't want to say that his sister is, let's say, abnormal, because Mrs. Wingfield feels very strongly about this. Laura also has a disability in the sense that she cannot walk properly. She has a kind of a limp because one leg is shorter than the other. So when Tom refers to it, Amanda Wingfield gets very angry, and she says that that is not something that makes you into a cripple. Laura is not a cripple. She has this slight disability. So that disability, plus the fact that she is playing and cleaning and polishing these glass animals all the time, plus her playing the Victrola or the phonograph with old records, combined with her shyness at meeting strangers, does not make her a very good candidate to meet people and to marry of her own choice. She doesn't go to parties, and it's not just because of her financial condition. She's very shy. She doesn't like meeting strangers. And when she is put into a strange group in the business school, she reacts very strongly to it. When she's asked to do something new like typing in shorthand, she throws up. She becomes so nauseous that she vomits, and the whole room is made dirty, and then she cannot face other people. So she runs away from business school because she's so embarrassed, she's so ashamed, and she is shy by nature. So she has all these characteristics, and when Amanda Wingfield tells her son to bring someone over to meet Laura, Tom says, Laura is different from other girls because she has this. One is her shyness, the other is this obsessive desire to clean and polish the animals. The third is this playing of the Victrola. These are the three things which, according to Tom, are negative points as far as meeting someone, falling in love with them, and marrying is concerned. So because Amanda Wingfield is very keen to have this done, she keeps on at Tom until one day he says, I have invited a colleague of mine over, but don't get excited because I've not told him why we are inviting him. I've just invited him to dinner, and you can see what he's like. He is about the only one that I can invite. I do not want to invite any of the others. So of course Mrs. Wingfield gets very excited, and she starts making preparations, elaborate preparations, like putting up new curtains and having a new floor lamp brought in, and taking out all the beautiful cutlery and crockery that she has not used, and that was a part of her dowry. And she brings in flowers and candles. So she makes a big sort of party out of it, whereas it's just a colleague of Tom Wingfield's coming to dinner. And of course, when Jim O'Connor, who is the guest, he does turn up, it comes as a shock to Laura, because that person is the one who in high school she had fallen in love with, and she had never quite recovered from that. So now when she realizes that she's going to come face to face with Jim O'Connor, she is very tense. She almost has a nervous breakdown. She refuses to go and open the door to him and to her brother Tom. And she looks around for various excuses not to be in his company. But as things turn out to be, when she is forced to join the others at the dining table, she stumbles and she almost falls. And when she stumbles, her mother says, you go and lie down. If you are not feeling well, you should lie down on the sofa in the living room. And of course, when they have finished dinner, Mrs. Wingfield sends Jim O'Connor to the living room, and she calls Tom out on the excuse of helping her clear the table. So Tom Wingfield goes out of the room, and Jim O'Connor and Laura are left in the living room. Now what you see here is actually what Tom remembers. In the very beginning of the play, Tennessee Williams had pointed out that this is a memory play and therefore it is unrealistic. So essentially speaking, what we do see is Tom's recollection of actual events. So sometimes Tom's memory is not as clear as it might be, but that is the only perspective we have. So we're going to study this from Tom's perspective. Tom, of course, occupies a very important role in the play. He's a character, and he's also the narrator of the play. So at the beginning of the play, when we see him dressed as a merchant sailor, which at the time of the action of the play, he's not. So the impression that is given to the audience is that Tom has joined the merchant mariners, and as a merchant mariner, he looks back over time, he looks back over his life, and he recollects particular events, particular incidents and persons from this memory, and then he relates to us the sequence of events which led to him leaving home and joining the merchant mariners. So the point at which I left you in the last class was where Jim O'Connor and Laura have started finally talking. Although Laura is shy, but Jim brings in such questions and statements which sort of bring the best out of Laura. And so Laura starts talking with him and starts discussing things with him. So let's see what we have for today. Now, just before the conversation part that we're going to do, Jim has been telling Laura that she is different from other girls, and Laura, of course, does not have any experience because she's not had exposure to any girls of her own age. So she says, I don't know. And Jim says, I judge you to be an old-fashioned type of girl, but I think that's a pretty good type to be. I hope you don't think I'm being too personal. So he's asking something very personal, and then he's passing judgment on how he thinks Laura to be. So he says, you know, I think you're a very old-fashioned type of girl. You're not the kind of girl who is overconfident and who goes out to parties a lot or who meets people on a daily basis. So he says, I think that you're an old-fashioned type of girl, and personally speaking, I like old-fashioned girls. So she says, you know, she gets very confused, and the chewing gum that he had offered her earlier, she now says, I believe I will take a piece of gum if you don't mind. And then, you know, she brings up her courage, she clears her throat, and she says, Mr. O'Connor, have you kept up with your singing? Now, until this point, Jim O'Connor does not realize that they have met before. For him, she's a total stranger. She is Tom Wingfield's sister, and he doesn't know anything else about her. So Jim says, when she asks, have you kept up with your singing? Are you still singing? He says, singing? Me? And Laura says, I remember what a beautiful voice you had. And Jim says, when did you hear me sing? Laura says, yes, very often. I don't suppose you remember me at all. Now, there is a little hope in her heart that he will remember and he'll say, oh, you're that beautiful young girl. But he doesn't remember at all. And so he asks how she knows that he used to sing. And Laura says, you don't remember me at all. And Jim, looks at her very closely. And then he says, I have an idea. I've seen you before. And I had that idea as soon as you opened the door. It seemed like I was almost about to remember your name, but I can't. So, he might be making this up. He might be really seriously thinking that she looks familiar. But because he couldn't remember her name, he stopped himself before he could say a name because it might not have been the right name. So when Laura says, don't you remember me at all? And Jim says, I had the feeling when you opened the door that I should know your name, but I was afraid that I might not come up with the right name, and so I stopped myself. And Laura says, were you about to say Blue Roses? And Jim says, yes, that's it. That's the name. And there was on the tip of my tongue, but at once I had the idea that that's not the kind of name that young girls have. And what if I come up with something like Blue Roses and your name is Jane Smith? So he gets very excited and he says, isn't it funny the tricks your memory plays? I somehow didn't connect you with high school. Now what he's perhaps trying to say here is that he does not think that Laura could have studied in the same high school as Jim O'Connor. And then he says, the strange thing is that you're also Shakespeare's sister, and please forgive me if I could not remember your name, but somehow it just slipped my mind. And Laura says, that's okay, you barely knew me. And Jim says, yes, but we did know each other. And Laura is trying to put him at his ease now. Previously, he had been trying to draw Laura out to make her feel comfortable in his presence and be able to communicate. So when he says, when did you recognize me? And Laura says, when I heard your name, I thought that it was probably you. I could not have thought of another James Delaney O'Connor. And of course, when Tom said that he knew you, of course that sort of put the seal on it, because Tom's my brother and we have been very close. So he says, why didn't you say something then? And Laura says, I was embarrassed. And Jim is very surprised and he says, it's strange how you meet people after such a long time, people you've known, and you do not realize how far away you're going to go from people after school or after college. And then, his memory sort of jogged. And he recalls other things and he says, weren't we in some class together? And Laura says, yes, we were in the singing class, in the chorus, and I sat across from you. So she even remembers the position that she sat in. And Jim, of course, doesn't remember anything at all. All that he does remember is Blue Roses, and the idea of Blue Roses brings to his mind several other ideas. And slowly and gradually, Jim also seems to remember, and he says, I seem to remember that you were always late for class. And Laura says, yes, it was difficult for me to get upstairs because I have this limp. And so it took me a long time to get up the stairs. So she says she had a problem getting up the stairs because of this leg of hers, and it made such a lot of sound. and she would go clump, clump, clump up the stairs. And Jim says, I never heard any clumping. I don't remember any clumping. And Laura says, you know, you might not have heard it, you might not remember it, but to me, that sound was so loud because it was a sound that nobody else was making. And so when I had to enter a classroom, I entered after everyone because everybody could run for class and I could not. So when I slowly clumped to the class, to me it appeared as if everyone's attention was focused on me, and I was holding everyone back by coming late to class. So she's very, very conscious of this limp that she has, this disability that she has. But Jim says, I don't remember that. And Laura says that you don't remember it because I made it a point to come to class early so that I would not have to face that embarrassment of watching people looking at me when I clumped into the classroom. And Jim says, that's nothing to be embarrassed about. But Laura says, it may not have been for you, but it was definitely very embarrassing for me. When she says this, he remembers all of a sudden that he used to call her blue roses. And he says, I was the one who started that, isn't it? And that takes Laura back into the past. And she says, yes, I was not well for some time, and so I missed school. And when I came back, you asked me what was the matter with me, and I said that I had pleurosis. Now, she says pleurosis, but Jim understands that to mean blue roses. And so he says that, you know, this is something that you had for me. And what makes Laura feel extra special is that this high school hero, Jim O'Connor, has a special name for her. So it was a very big thrill for her to be in that very, very select and special group. So she has not forgotten it, although Jim has. And Jim forgets even the reason why he called her blue roses, but then Laura reminds him and she says, this is the reason why you called me blue roses. And then sort of Jim goes back down memory lane and he starts thinking of other things, and he says, I remember that you were very shy, that you never went out with other people. And Laura says, you know, I was not really good at making friends. And so I was more or less always on my own. So Jim tries to put her at ease by asking her more questions and by sort of providing reasons or excuses for Laura's not meeting people or not wanting to meet strangers. So Jim and Laura have this conversation, and during this conversation Laura reminds him of certain things that sort of jogs Jim's memory, and he comes up with certain other points, and he says, you know, you were as far as I remember, you were always shy. And Laura says, yes, but you know, there was a reason for my shyness. Because I had this limp, I never felt comfortable making friends with other people. And now to somebody like Jim, that's not something very extraordinary. And he says, you know, that you shouldn't have let that stand in your way. And Laura says, you know, it's something that you only realize when you experience it. But according to Jim, and because you have to remember that he's taking these public speaking classes in night school, he says that you should have come to terms with it, and you know that people are not so dreadful when you know them. That's what you have to remember. Everybody has problems. You're not the only one who has problems. But you don't bring your problems to school. You leave them at home and you try to make the best that you can. You may have been disappointed, but then you were not the only one. There were plenty of other people who were disappointed or who could not get what they wanted. But they did not let that sort of slow them down. They still went ahead and did things. And he gives his own example, and he says, for instance, I hoped when I was going to high school that I would be further along at this time 6 years later than I am now. You remember that wonderful write-up I had in the Torch? And he is reminded of the annual magazine that the high school had, and which was titled The Torch. And he said, you know, when we were in high school, somebody did a write-up on me, and it spoke in such glowing words about my character and my performance in the basketball team, in the glee club, etc., etc. But it did not predict that I would be working in a warehouse in 6 years' time. It's been 6 years since high school, but look what I'm doing. In high school, I was so wonderful, I was talented, I was pointed at and appreciated for what I was doing. But 6 years after high school, what am I? I am just a shipping clerk in a warehouse. And so people do not always become what they think they will or what they want to. So he gives his own example, and with that he tries to explain to her that she needs to come out of that shyness, she needs to come out of that shell and talk to people, communicate with people, go out to parties, try to have fun, and not just confine herself to the apartment, the animals, and the Victrola. So when he mentions the Torch, which is the school magazine, Laura says, I have the issue of the Torch that had your name in it. And so she at once gets up. Remember, they've been sitting on the floor. She gets up and she brings the annual magazine to Jim. Now that gives you the impression that it was somewhere very close by. Remember when Laura's having a conversation with her mother, Amanda Wingfield asks her very early on in the play, she says, haven't you ever liked any boy? And Laura says, yes, I did, but that was 6 years ago. That was when I was in high school, and I am no longer in high school. So she has that annual magazine close by, or the yearbook as it is called, and she brings it and shows it to Jim O'Connor, and you know, he's very happy, he's very excited, because that was the high point of his life. After high school, he just sort of deteriorated financially, socially, intellectually, and it does his morale very good to know that here is someone who remembers him and who has a very good impression of him, not like other people, not like somebody like Tom, for example, who knows him only as a colleague in the warehouse and who doesn't have a very good impression of Jim O'Connor. And Laura shows him photographs from the school play, and she shows Jim O'Connor in his element, at the high point of his life. And so she shows him various photographs, and Jim is taken down memory lane. Now it becomes very strange, because you know that this play is already a trip down memory lane, and that memory lane belongs to Tom. Now when Laura and Jim O'Connor start talking and discussing things in high school, from here onwards you see Jim and Laura having a common memory lane, And so they travel down that memory lane when they are looking at the photographs and the articles in the torch. And Laura says, you know, you acted beautifully and you had such a sweet voice. And Jim says, you heard me? And Laura says, all 3 times. There were 3 performances of the Pirates of Penzance, and each time it played, Laura made sure that she was there to see Jim O'Connor and to hear him sing. And Jim is very surprised that he had impressed someone so much. He just thinks that, you know, Laura was a class fellow. But slowly and gradually he realizes that Laura had a crush on him and that she's still not out of it. So Jim is surprised that she has heard him singing, she's seen him performing in all the 3 performances of the high school play, and he's very impressed, and he asks her why she did that. And she says, I wanted you to autograph my poem. Remember, he was her hero. He was the one that she adored, and she wanted his autograph as a keepsake. And he says, well, why didn't you ask me to? And she says, you know, you were always surrounded by your own friends, and I felt like I would be intruding if I went up to you and said, can you please autograph my program? And Jim says, you know, you should have just walked up to me and asked me to autograph your program. And Laura says, you know, I couldn't have done that. And Jim says, I was beleaguered by females in those days. So because he was good looking, he was young, he was strong, he was in the basketball team, and you know, basketball and football players are always heroes for young girls. He says that, you know, I was surrounded by females all the time. And Laura says, exactly, that's what I'm trying to say. You were surrounded by your class fellows, your juniors, and I felt very sort of out of place if I thought of going up to you and asking you for your autograph, because there were all these beautiful girls surrounding you, and I felt like such a non-entity. I felt so unimportant that I did not want to go up to you when you had so many other girls around you and ask you for your autograph. And Jim says, yes, you know, he suddenly remembers how popular he was. And he says, you know, I was spoiled in high school. Laura says that you were friendly, but you were always surrounded by your own friends, and so you know, I really could not go up to you and say that I wanted to speak with you. So she says, you were very, very popular, and he says, yes, you know, I had a lot of girls around me, and that, you know, this is the kind of conversation that they're having. Laura is praising him, and he's thinking of what he was like and how far he has come and what he has made of his life. So it's a very pleasant time that they have together, with Laura singing his praises and telling him how good he was and what a wonderful performer he was, and then saying that I wanted your autograph, but you were always surrounded by other young girls, and so I never had the courage to go up to you and say that I want to speak with you or that I want you to autograph my program. Now when she gets to this point, Jim says, give me the program, I'll autograph it now for you, better late than never. So this is something that really surprises Laura, and it's a very pleasant surprise for Laura. But Jim says, you know, my signature isn't worth very much right now, but someday maybe it will increase in value. And then he tells her that being disappointed in one thing and being discouraged is something else. You were disappointed, but then you were also discouraged. I am disappointed, but I am not discouraged. I'm 23 years old. And how old are you? And so Laura says, I'm 24. And he says, that's not very old. You know, you can still make a lot about your life. You could take up a profession. You finished high school. And she says, I dropped out of high school because I had very bad grades in my final examination. And then, you know, she doesn't want him thinking about her and what a poor student she was. So she switches the conversation around and she says, how are you and Emily Meisenbach getting along? And he says, oh, that idiot. And Laura says, why do you call her that? Now, all along, she's been imagining Jim O'Connor married to Emily Meisenbach. And Jim O'Connor says that, you know, that was just a rumor. There was nothing between me and Emily. And Laura says, but in the personal section of the magazine, it said that you were engaged to her. And he says, you know, that was what she wanted, but I did not fall for that. I wasn't ready for that. Remember, they were just in high school, so that means they would have been teenagers, maybe 15, 16 years old. And then he says that that was something that she had spread. Emily Meisenbach had spread the rumor that they were engaged. But Jim O'Connor never did. According to him, he never felt strongly about her, and she had more to do with spreading this rumor than I did. I didn't even know where it originated until I found out that she had spread it. Now, during this time, Laura and Jim have become very comfortable with each other. Remember, they're sitting on the floor, they're not sitting on the sofa where you feel very formal and you have to sit in a stiff manner. They have this very comfortable relationship, and they're talking, and so and you know, she appears to be beautiful also, because remember, the electric light has gone off, and the only light that they do have is the light of the moon, and that is supplemented by a candle. So in candlelight she appears very, very beautiful, and by now, you know, Jim is feeling very comfortable, but she's still tense, because to her, this physical closeness to Jim O'Connor is very disturbing. And so what she does is, she has this piece of glass in her hand. She has this glass animal from the cabinet, and she turns it over and over again. And then Jim, who has started smoking during this time, he asks Laura what she has done since high school, and Laura comes up with this, that she joined a business school. And he said, okay, so what have you been doing? And she says, I dropped out of business school because it gave me indigestion. Remember that scene where she threw up, where she vomited in class, and after which she just ran away and she didn't want to go back to class. So she's referring to that when she says that I took up a business course in college, but then I left. So when she says that I left business college because it gave me indigestion, Jim looks at her, and he feels slightly worried by the thought that she couldn't even do business college. And she says, he says, so what do you do now? And Laura says, oh, I don't do anything much. And don't think that I sit around doing nothing, because I have my glass collection, and that takes up a lot of my time. Glass is something that you have to take good care of. And he says, what did you say about glass? And she says, a glass collection. I have a glass collection. And all of a sudden Jim changes track and he says, you know what I think is the trouble with you? You have an inferiority complex. Now here he is bringing in whatever training he is receiving in night school. In the course on public speaking, they tell you that you have to get over your sense of inferiority and you have to be confident and you must think that the other person is inferior and that you are better than them. So he brings that psychology that he has memorized from his night school class, and he says, you know, I think what the problem with you is that you have an inferiority complex. I had it too, but my case was not so aggravated as yours. You are shy, you consider yourself to be less than other human beings. I made up for it because I had a voice, I had an aptitude for science, and although I did not think of myself as being outstandingly clever, yet I could do certain things and I could do them with a lot of confidence, so that people around me were very impressed. And he says, I haven't made a regular study of it, but I have a friend who says that I can analyze people better than doctors who make a profession out of it. And he says, I don't think that that is true, but I have been able to judge people and to gauge people for exactly what they are. And I think that your principal trouble is that you are shy and that you have an inferiority complex, which means that you lack faith in yourself, you lack confidence in yourself, and if you don't have the proper amount of faith in yourself, you can end up as a severely damaged person. So, you know, saying that you could not walk into a class in front of the whole school, this is a sure sign that you suffer from inferiority. Nobody probably noticed what you were doing. I know that I did not notice you. So chances are that there were other people who didn't notice you either. And so when you say that you didn't like walking into class because people looked around at you, you're the one who felt this. Nobody in class thought of it that way, but you were so conscious of this disability being a very negative point that you obsessed about it and you thought about it all the time, even when people were not thinking of it in connection with you. So you dropped out of school and that aggravated your problem. So if you dropped out of school because you had a clump, I think that that is very silly. You should have completed your education because nobody thought of that clump. I know that I did think of it, and if I did not notice it, chances are that there were other people who did not notice it. But you made a big issue out of it because you got your imagination working on it, and that magnified the situation. If you had not thought about it as something that crippled you, you could have passed with very good results. As it is, you magnified the problem for yourself. The problem did not even exist. And what you need to do is think of yourself as being superior in some way, as being better than other human beings. And Laura says, in what way would I think? And Jim says, man alive, Laura, just look about you a little. What do you see? A world full of common people, all of them born and all of them going to die. Which of them has 1/10 of your good points, or mine, or anyone else's, as far as that goes? So this is all, you know, those night school lessons coming out, which in order to make you a good public speaker, they convince you that you are the best that the world has. And therefore, you should not feel shy and you should not feel embarrassed in front of people, and you should be able to speak with confidence. And of course here he glances at himself in the mirror, because she has made him realize that he was very handsome, and he was a regular heartthrob, and all the girls followed him all the time. And so he sort of takes a sideways look at the mirror, and then he goes on to explain to her what he is doing. And he says that my interest happens to lie in electrodynamics, and that is why I'm taking a course in radio engineering at night school, on top of a fairly responsible job at the warehouse. He's shipping clerk, so that means he's entering everything that comes into the warehouse, and he's making sure that when those objects or when those items are taken out, there's a proper record of them. So he keeps a record, he does clerical work, and on top of that clerical work, he's also studying public speaking as a subject, and he is studying radio engineering at night. So there's a lot on his plate. He has his time fully occupied. So he has taken up a course in radio engineering because he thinks that television is the in thing, and he needs to be amongst the first people to be working in television. And when he says that, his eyes get all starry, and he's looking up and he's imagining himself as one of the big engineers in the television industry, and he imagines that he's going to have knowledge and power and of course a lot of money. So he says, all these things are going to come to me, I don't have to go looking for them. And his attitude, his behavior is so convincing that Laura believes everything that he says. And she's totally taken in by this long spiel that he makes about how after he's done this radio engineering, he's going to be a very big shot, a very vada afsar, and of course everyone will appreciate him, will admire him. And so convincing is he to Laura that Laura just sort of sits up and starts to take notice. And when Jim says, how about you? Isn't there something that interests you and not anyone else? She says, I have my glass collection. And Jim says, I'm not really sure I know what you're talking about. And she says, my glass collection. They're ornaments mostly, they're decoration pieces. Most of them are made out of glass, and they are animals. And I have to take care of these animals because glass is something that is very delicate. And then she sort of shows him this one piece that she has in her hand, and that she somehow identifies with. And this animal is a unicorn. You know what a unicorn is? It has the shape of a horse. It's a mythical creature. It doesn't really exist, and it has a horn in the center, single horn, pointed, right in the center of the forehead. And that is what makes him different from all the other creatures in general and all the other horses in particular, the unicorn. So she says that I have this glass collection and that takes up all my time. Now one would think that a glass collection cannot take up all your time, but Laura, being Laura, sits there in front of the cabinet the whole day, and she polishes the glass and she cleans it, and then she washes it, and then she cleans it again, and then she polishes it. So this process has been continuing for several years. So she puts the unicorn on his hand and she says, look at this beautiful creature. And Jim says, it sure does shine. and Laura says, I shouldn't be partial, but the unicorn is specific to me. It's something that I can relate to, and I just love this unicorn. And Jim says, a unicorn, huh? That's something that does not really exist in the human world. So he must feel lonesome. Now the reference here is, of course, to the condition of Laura Wingfield. She doesn't have friends, she doesn't go out, and so she is somewhat of a misfit in society. And Laura at this point says that although the unicorn is a very special animal, he stays on the same shelf as the horses. Although the unicorn is special because it has a horn on its forehead, Laura says that he is on the same shelf as horses and he doesn't mind about it. And Jim says, how do you know? And of course Laura sort of makes a joke of it, and she says, I haven't heard any arguments lately. So they take this line of conversation, and she says, and Jim says, so you haven't heard any arguments, so that's a very good sign. And where shall I put him? And Laura says, put him on the table. They all like a change of scenery once in a while. Now see, she is giving them not only habits, likes and dislikes, but she's giving them human features. And so she says, put this unicorn on the glass table. I don't want to put him back in the cabinet because he has come out for some fresh air. And Jim, just stretches, and while he's doing that, he hears music, and he asks Laura where the music is coming from, and Laura says it's coming from the Paradise Dance Hall. Now she knows that the Paradise Dance Hall plays music and that there's dancing going on, but Laura has never ever gone there. And Jim, when he hears music, he says, how about dancing? And Laura says, oh, I have not thought about it. And Jim makes a regular situation out of it, and he says, or is your program filled up? And he's making a reference to formal dances in the days gone by, when young ladies would sit on one side of the dance floor and the young men would sit on the other side, and the young ladies would have a list of the dances, the music that is being played and the different dances that are going to be danced, and they would have the name of a young man or a man against every dance. So that was called the program. If you were asked for, let's say, the 3rd, 5th and 7th dances, then you would write that person's name against it. And that is what Jim is referring to when he says, is your program all filled up? Let me have a look at it. And so he just takes up an imaginary card and he says, well, every dance is taken. You are so popular. I'll have to scratch some out. I'll have to take some people's names out. And so, holding this imaginary card in his hand, he makes lines across some imaginary names. And he says, aha, a waltz. This is the one that we are going to dance. And Laura says, I can't dance. And Jim says, oh, that's a lot of rubbish. This is your inferiority complex coming in. And get up and you can dance. I know you can do it. And so he starts to teach her how to dance. Now we're going to stop at this point. Before we do, I'm going to recap what we've done today, so that when we start the next class, which hopefully is going to be the last class, you have a very good idea of where exactly we are in terms of the action in the play. So when the when we started this class, I told you that we were at a point where Jim and Laura have just started to feel comfortable with each other. Jim is sitting on the floor, on the sitting room floor, and he makes Laura sit there also. It's a rather romantic scene in the sense that there's no electric light. Remember, the lights went off. There's moonlight filtering in, and there's a candle burning there. And so Jim and Laura start talking, and slowly Laura reminds Jim that they were at high school together. And Jim asks Laura why she was so shy, and Laura said, you know, there were times when I wanted to talk to you, but you were always surrounded with girls. He says, well, you know, that was the time. Young men who are in basketball teams and who are also singing and taking part in the plays and the musicals and the dances, those young men are always popular, and girls will always fall for them. But if you wanted to talk to me, or if you wanted something, you could just have walked up to me. And Laura says, no, I felt shy because there were all these beautiful, healthy young girls who surrounded you. And Jim says, what's wrong with you? And Laura says, you know, I have this limp. And I felt shy because of this limp, because I could not run with other people. So I made sure that I came to class early so that I wouldn't have to go clump, clump, clump up the stairs. And Jim says, I never noticed that. And even if you had it, you didn't have to make such a big issue out of it. But she does make an issue out of it because she's very shy. And she's very self-conscious about this. Plus the fact that Jim is sort of like a high school idol, and everybody looks up to him, and everybody surrounds him whenever he is free. So Laura never goes up to him. But she does say that I saw you performing in the Pirates of Penzance, and I heard you singing because I used to be in your singing class, so I was very excited when you were chosen to perform in the Pirates of the Penzance, and there were only 3 performances, but I went to each performance and I saw you acting and I heard you singing, and it was really uplifting for me. Now, hearing these things, Jim comes to the conclusion that Laura is suffering from an inferiority complex, and he says, you know, you don't have to consider yourself inferior or less than other people. In fact, you should think yourself superior to all the others around. You know, these are lessons that he has been taught at night school, because you have to remember that he's doing public speaking in a night school in addition to radio engineering. And he says that I am doing radio engineering because I am interested in television, which is going to be the latest commodity, and I want to join the force of engineers who are working on television and assist them and do something which would make me a very strong and healthy part of the community. So he says, I'm not only doing public speaking, but I'm also doing radio engineering. And so they start talking, and Jim sort of halfway through the conversation, he says, okay, so you wanted the program for the Pirates of the Penzance autograph. Give me the program and I'll autograph it. But with that, he says, my signature may not be worth much right now, but one day it may be different. And what he's referring to is the fact that 6 years after high school, he is just a shipping clerk. He has not been able to gain the executive status that he had thought he would, or that the school people had thought that he would. So when she brings up the school magazine, which is about 6 years old, you see Jim O'Connor's photographs there. And that makes Jim think of the past and how wonderful the past was. So he starts thinking of himself as a high school student, and he remembers how popular he was with everyone. And while he is talking with Laura and making himself more and more comfortable, you know, he starts smoking and he just sort of leans back. So he's physically as well as mentally comfortable in the presence of Laura. And then, of course, he hears a little music and he asks where that music is coming from. So Laura tells him that it is coming from the Paradise dance club. And Jim says, well, if we hear dance music, why should we not dance? And then he makes this very elaborate pretense of looking at Laura's program and saying, oh, you know, you're such a popular girl. Everyone wants to dance with you and I don't have a chance. So he just imagines that he has this card in his hand and he says, okay, I'll have to scratch some of the names out. And he goes ahead and does that, and then he says, oh, a waltz. Now by that time the music that he has been hearing from across the alley changes to music for a waltz, and he says, okay, let's dance. Why don't we dance? And Laura says, I can't dance. And Laura is panic stricken because she has a limp. So she feels very, very uncomfortable, and she says, I cannot dance. And Jim says, what do you mean you can't dance? Every girl can dance. And she says, no, I can't do it because, you know, I might step on you. And because I have this sort of boot on my leg, if I step on your foot, that's going to hurt because it's a very heavy and a very solid boot that I'm wearing. And Jim tries to make her feel very comfortable, and he says that that's not a problem at all, and all that you need to do is to feel confident that this is something that you can do. If you say it to yourself over and over again, you will reach a time, a day, when you can do everything and not feel inferior, not feel that you are somehow less than other people. You are a wonderful person, you are beautiful, you are sweet and sensitive. Why should other people not be acquainted with you? The reason lies in your inferiority complex and in nothing else. So you have to do away with that. You have to make sure that you are doing something other than playing with glass animals, which is something, you know, that she's tried to explain to him, but he doesn't really understand what she means when she says, you know, I have a lot of work to do and I have this glass collection and it's not easy to maintain. So Jim O'Connor cannot see any sense in it. He's a very practical person. As I said before, he's studying radio engineering. He's doing a course in public speaking because he wants to get ahead in life. He doesn't want to be stuck as a shipping clerk all his life. So the point at which we are going to leave, Jim and Laura get up, and Jim asks Laura to dance. Thank you for being patient with me. That's all we have for today. Next class, we will inshallah wind up this play and the semester. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.